Okay. So I wanted to talk about simplicity. And the kind of pitfalls of how the mind likes to make things more complicated than they need to be. Whereas everything can be really simple. So I'm talking about the need to understand, the need to achieve, striving, looking forwards, trying to figure things out. And these patterns can motivate you, but they can also be obstacles. So you don't need the vast mountain of knowledge, intellectual knowledge. I've heard some people, I mean, to be fair, so I explained in one of my earlier videos that I had and it was an experience of non-duality. It's a memory now, but when I explained it, it sounded very much like a non-dual experience, and at that point in time I had a very limited understanding of the path that people talk about and the philosophical angles and technical knowledge about things, and I kind of wrote it off because I actually thought I had a stroke or something. Like, I thought something had went wrong in my brain, and I wrote it off because I wasn't really, the person wasn't actively searching or let's say striving or consciously moving towards openly accepting a different perspective on the experience of reality, or a different perspective on what reality is. And I moved very quickly, just randomly, into a very profound non-dual experience. And out of context, it was extremely bizarre. And it's the same I talked about psychedelics. The context, unless you're doing it within the right context, with the right intentions, with the right openness and integration, it's not really going to work. And I have consumed an enormous, and I mean an enormous, ridiculously extensive amount of material within the last how long ago is this now? Let's say within the last year. And to be honest, there have been some kind of nuggets that have helped, and I can probably count them on one hand. But they had been obscured by this striving, this need to understand, which is moving in kind of the opposite direction. Kind of like another distraction, like adopting a spiritual ego or a new spiritual identity, which is very common. Whereas it can be simple, and almost the less you know, the more open you are, because you've not structured these assumptions and expectations that you lay over your experience, or you use to try and guide or shape your experience, which can be counterproductive. Whereas it's very simple, right here, just open to what is. I think is maybe a good way to phrase it, is just being entirely open to what is, and just experiencing what is as acutely as possible. And that's kind of all that's needed, really. I mean, the psychological understanding doesn't really it can be helpful, I'm sure, relatively on the level of the person, but it doesn't necessarily translate. And I know it can trigger insight, but it's not necessary. It's not needed. And I say that because, like I explained, it can almost be, I'm going to say counterproductive, but that assumes a productive process, whereas even that it's not that. Simplicity, openness. Otherwise you just end up, like I explained before, I expanded out into another self, and then there's just selves everywhere, inescapable identities just projected onto everything, assimilated by the original idea of identity that seems to be inherent. It can be very simple, and sometimes letting go of that is what is needed. For me, I chased experiences, experience chaser, wanted a bigger and better experience, wanted a more transcendent experience of reality, and I thought that the more powerful the experience, then that would trigger a more powerful insight. And of course that suggests a kind of hierarchy of knowledge and insight, whereas that's not it. Just what is, just this. Anything that we can objectify with a label, awareness, mind, God, perceiver, consciousness, witness, self, not self, duality, singularity, non-dual, anything you can any word or beyond that, any concept that can be communicated in the word, isn't it, because it isn't a thing and it can't be communicated, and the route to that is an absolute, I'm not saying nothingness, but absence of nothing and something. It's paradox. It transcends entirely anything that we can conceptualize. So the more concepts we accumulate, the further from it, or whatever it is I'm talking about here, we get. And I've heard people talk about the importance of say self-inquiry and having focus and direction, but again, everything's a paradox, because there's no focus, there's no direction. These things are, or experience, these things are relative on the level of the person. We're not searching for something, we're not looking for a remedy, although yes, the person seeks, the person wants to not suffer. Ultimately that's just, say, a side effect of the process that's relative to the person. Since silence, say presence, but neither silence nor presence. Like I say, paradox, it's all paradoxical. But then again, paradox is just another concept. So you just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep deconstructing these conditionings, because all this is a conditioning. All these things are conditionings. Not that we're trying to get rid of the conditionings, but the conditioning is a form of illusion that we want to accept, to let go of and see through. And being open to what is, and a willingness to let go of these, an awareness that of clear seeing, clear sight, to be able to see what this is that's obscuring our true nature, and not to be able to see, become aware of it on a psychological level, but just to see it is enough. Just to be open to it is enough, because once it's seen, it can be dissolved in a sense. Sometimes simplicity is effective, more effective than what the person thinks is effective in terms of trying to figure out through using the mind, because that's all it really knows how to do. Although in saying that, like I said, relatively, this can be useful, and there are changes, there are experiences that the person goes throughout this process that are necessary, and that's okay. Like, for example, for a while the search for the awakening, the striving towards awakening, generates more suffering. Sometimes after awakening or a shift in perception, there's more suffering because you're aware of it, you can see it, you're aware of it, and then it expresses itself and it comes apart, whereas it was being suppressed and crystallized the whole time before. But yeah, that's it. Just this, open to what is. Just being aware of awareness of what is, and openness. And yes, in the beginning, it feels like the person is applying effort. That's just because that's what the person is. That's all it knows how to do. It's like the person's just one big effort. That's how it works. Anyway, that'll do for now.